The Miocene epoch was a time of titans. Beneath the waves of a much warmer Earth, one of the dominant macro-predators of the oceans was Otodus Megalodon, a shark the size of a school bus, armed with jaws that could crush a car. For millions of years, few marine predators approached its size and ecological role, but evolution is relentless. From the mammalian lineage emerged a challenger that would redefine apex predation, Livyatan melvillei, a hyper-carnivorous sperm whale with the largest biting teeth of any known animal. How did a warm-blooded, air-breathing leviathan clash with the ultimate cartilaginous killing machine? Did they fight jaw to jaw, or did they wage a silent strategic war over the ocean's resources? Today, we will learn about how Livyatan may have challenged Megalodon for dominance in Miocene marine ecosystems, exploring how this ancient whale challenged Megalodon for dominance of the prehistoric oceans. We will dive deep into the fossil record, explore the cutting-edge science of biomechanics, and decode the dramatic climate shifts that forced these two apex predators into the ultimate evolutionary showdown. If you enjoy this deep dive into paleontology, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Also, leave a comment below letting us know where in the world and what time it is as you're watching this. Let's plunge into the ancient seas. To truly comprehend how two of the largest apex predators in Earth's history could simultaneously inhabit the same global ecosystem, we must dismantle our modern understanding of the oceans and reconstruct the planet as it existed during the Miocene epoch. Spanning from roughly 23 million to 5.3 million years ago, the Miocene was an era of profound geological transformation, climatic volatility, and unparalleled biological extravagance. It was a world vastly different from our own, defined by a greenhouse climate that was gradually shifting toward a cooler, more modern state, yet still retaining enough intense thermal energy to turn the global ocean into a massive, highly productive engine of life. The primary driver of this ecological hyperproductivity lay in the unique arrangement of the continents and the resulting ancient ocean currents. During the early and middle Miocene, the planetary thermostat was dialed significantly higher than it is today. Deep-sea core samples and isotopic analysis of fossilized microorganisms reveal global temperatures that averaged several degrees Celsius warmer than the modern baseline. This elevated thermal energy prevented the formation of permanent continental-scale ice sheets in the northern hemisphere and kept the Antarctic ice sheet in a state of dynamic flux. Without freezing polar caps locking up the planet's water supply, global sea levels were dramatically higher, flooding the margins of continental plates and creating vast, shallow, sun-drenched epicontinental seas. These shallow coastal environments acted as massive marine incubators. Flooded continental shelves received an abundance of sunlight, which, when combined with warm water temperatures, accelerated the metabolic rates of marine life at every single trophic level. However, heat alone is not enough to sustain an ecosystem capable of producing multi-ton marine monsters. The true catalyst for the explosion of Miocene life was the global system of oceanic highways. In the equatorial regions, the continents had not yet assumed their modern configurations. Most importantly, the Isthmus of Panama did not exist. Instead, a deep, wide marine gateway known as the Central American Seaway separated North and South America. This open corridor allowed a massive, uninterrupted equatorial current to flow freely between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This circumtropical current acted as a global conveyor belt of thermal energy and nutrients. As it swept across the planet, driven by powerful trade winds, it prevented the stark thermal isolation of ocean basins that we see today. At the same time, the closing of the Tethys Ocean to the east was altering the geometry of the Mediterranean region, forcing deep-sea waters to redirect and upwell against emerging land masses. Ocean upwelling is the mechanical process by which deep, cold, nutrient-rich waters are forced upward toward the sunlit surface layers of the ocean. These deep waters are packed with dissolved nitrates, phosphates, and silicates, the molecular fertilizers of the sea. When these ancient upwelling cells breached the sunlit epipelagic zone, they triggered phytoplankton blooms of staggering proportions. Billions of microscopic, single-celled photosynthetic organisms multiplied at exponential rates, turning vast swathes of the Miocene ocean into a dense green soup of primary production. Feeding on this microscopic pasture were astronomical swarms of zooplankton, including krill, copepods, and small marine invertebrates. This dense concentration of primary and secondary consumers formed the unbreakable foundation of a hyper-extended marine food web. The availability of this inexhaustible food supply triggered a profound evolutionary gold rush among vertebrate animals. Small, schooling, planktivorous fish species multiplied by the trillions, filling the pelagic zones. But the most significant beneficiaries of this nutrient explosion were the marine mammals, specifically the cetaceans. The Miocene was the golden age of whale diversity. Following their transition from land-dwelling ancestors millions of years prior, cetaceans split into two major groups, the odontocetes, or toothed whales, and the mysticetes, or baleen whales. In the modern ocean, we associate baleen whales with colossal sizes, such as the blue whale or the fin whale. However, during the middle of the Miocene epoch, baleen whales were in a completely different stage of their evolutionary journey. They were small, highly agile, and incredibly diverse. Dozens of species belonging to extinct families like the cetothyreids roamed the coastal waters and open ocean highways. These ancient baleen whales typically measured between 3 and 9 meters in length, roughly the size of a modern minnow compared to today's giants, but perfectly bite-sized for an emerging class of mega-predators. These small baleen whales travelled in massive migratory pods, moving between highly productive upwelling zones to gorge themselves on the endless carpets of zooplankton. They were, in essence, highly concentrated, floating packages of dense blubber, muscle, and metabolic energy. The sheer abundance of these small to medium cetaceans created a completely vacant ecological niche at the absolute apex of the marine food chain. In accordance with the fundamental laws of thermodynamics and trophic ecology, an ecosystem can only support a top-tier predator if the underlying biomass is large enough to absorb the catastrophic energy loss that occurs at each step up the food pyramid. Typically, only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level is successfully transferred to the next. For a predator weighing dozens of tons to exist, the baseline of primary production must be unimaginably vast. The Miocene ocean met this requirement with room to spare. The biomass was so dense, so reliable, and so packed with caloric value that it did not just invite the evolution of a single apex predator. It created an evolutionary arms race that allowed two completely independent lineages of giant animals to max out their physical boundaries simultaneously. On one side of this evolutionary divide stood the cartilaginous fish. Sharks had spent hundreds of millions of years refining their role as the premier predators of the ocean. They were cold-blooded, highly efficient, and possessed an anatomical blueprint optimized for sensory tracking and low-energy cruising. In the warm, nutrient-saturated waters of the early Miocene, a specialized lineage of mega-toothed sharks found the ultimate hunting ground. With a limitless supply of slow-moving, blubber-rich cetaceans to prey upon, natural selection favored individuals with increased body size, wider gapes, and more robust dentition. Over millions of years, this lineage culminated in the development of a predatory fish that defied all previously established biological limits of marine animals. Simultaneously, a completely different biological revolution was occurring within the mammalian lineage. Mammals are warm-blooded, air-breathing, highly intelligent organisms with complex social structures and highly advanced internal heating systems. While being warm-blooded requires a massive, continuous intake of calories to maintain a constant internal body temperature, it also grants immense advantages in terms of sustained speed, cognitive processing, and muscular stamina. The ancestors of the modern sperm whale recognized the immense caloric bounty roaming the Miocene seas. Instead of specializing in deep-sea squid consumption like their modern descendants, These ancient odontocetes took a radically different evolutionary path. They leaned heavily into hyper-carnivory, developing massive bone-crushing jaws designed explicitly to hunt and consume other marine mammals. Thus, the unique environmental architecture of the Miocene epoch laid the groundwork for an unprecedented ecological stalemate. The planet had constructed an arena of global proportions fueled by a blazing greenhouse climate, steered by unimpeded equatorial currents, and fertilized by relentless deep-sea upwelling. This physical engine produced a biological golden age, an ocean choked with trillions of fish, and millions of blubber-rich whales that acted as a continuous high-calorie buffet. It was an environment of such profound excess that it overrode the standard evolutionary constraints of planetary ecosystems. It created a world where the energy budget of the ocean was so wildly in the surplus that it could simultaneously fund the existence of the ultimate predatory shark and the ultimate predatory whale. The stage was set, the food supply was secured, and the two titans were about to claim their shared kingdom, setting the course for a silent multi-million-year struggle for absolute dominance over the global ocean. To understand the absolute zenith of predatory fish evolution, we must examine the lineage of the ultimate mega-toothed shark, Otodus Megalodon. For decades, popular culture and early zoological studies misclassified this ocean titan as a direct ancestor of the modern great white shark, placing it within the genus Carcharodon. However, a modern revolution in cladistics and dental morphology has completely dismantled this family tree. Today, scientific consensus firmly establishes that Megalodon belonged to an entirely separate, now extinct family known as the Ottodontidae. This lineage of mega-toothed sharks traced its roots back over 100 million years to the Cretaceous period, long before the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Throughout the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, this line of apex predators steadily scaled up in size, refining their anatomical blueprint alongside the rise of marine mammals. This evolutionary trajectory was a slow, multi-million-year march toward an ecological niche that required unprecedented physical dimensions, culminating in the appearance of Megalodon during the early Miocene. As a member of the class Chondrustes, Megalodon was a cartilaginous fish. Unlike mammals or bony fish, its skeleton was made entirely of flexible, lightweight cartilage, rather than dense calcium phosphate bone. While cartilage provides immense hydrodynamic advantages, allowing a massive fish to maintain buoyancy and structural flexibility without being crushed under its own weight, it poses a profound challenge for modern paleontology. Cartilage does not fossilize well. Under normal geological conditions, it decays rapidly long before mineralization can occur. Consequently, the fossil record of this super predator is notoriously fragmentary, consisting almost exclusively of thousands of isolated rock-hard teeth and occasional, highly calcified vertebral centra. This scarcity of skeletal material forced scientists to develop highly sophisticated mathematical models and comparative anatomy techniques to answer the most fundamental question in apex predator research. How big was this animal? For over a century, estimating the length and mass of a creature known only from its teeth was a battleground of competing methodology. Early 20th century reconstructions relied on simple linear scaling, using the great white shark as an absolute template. This led to wildly exaggerated size estimates, with some early displays suggesting a length of nearly 30 meters. These early models were deeply flawed because they failed to account for allometric growth, the biological principle that different body parts grow at different rates as an animal increases in total volume. To resolve these discrepancies, modern paleontologists shifted away from simple linear equations toward multivariate statistical regressions and geometric morphometrics. Rather than comparing Megalodon teeth strictly to a single species, researchers began measuring the dental structures of a wide range of modern, lamniform sharks, including the short-fin mako, the porbeagle, the salmon shark, and the great white. by measuring the precise relationship between crown height, root width, total tooth position, and overall vertebral diameter in living sharks, scientists established a robust mathematical baseline linking tooth anatomy to total body length. When these refined regressions are applied to the largest known fully preserved Megalodon teeth, which can measure over 18 centimeters in slant height, the data yields a remarkably consistent and terrifying picture. The absolute maximum body length for Otodus. Megalodon is now scientifically estimated to be between 15 and 18 meters, with an average adult length hovering around 13 to 14 meters. To put this in perspective, a maximum-sized adult was roughly 3 times longer than the largest scientifically verified modern great white shark, and easily matched the length of a modern, articulated transit bus. However, length is only a single dimension. To understand the true ecological impact of this super predator, we must look at body mass volume, which scales cubically rather than linearly. As an animal doubles in length, its weight increases 8-fold. To calculate the total body mass of Megalodon, modern researchers utilize 3-dimensional digital modeling. By using high-resolution computed tomography scans of exceptionally rare, associated fossil vertebral columns, such as the famous specimen preserved in Belgium, which contains over 100 individual vertebral centra, scientists can reconstruct the structural core of the animal's torso. These digital vertebrae are then wrapped in virtual muscle layers based on the anatomical proportions of living lamniform sharks, taking into account the unique physiological adaptations of this specific group. The resulting 3-dimensional computational reconstructions reveal that a mature 15-meter Megalodon would have possessed a total body mass approaching 48 metric tons. The absolute largest individuals, reaching the 18-meter threshold, are estimated to have tipped the scales at an astonishing 90 to 100 metric tons. This body mass calculation moves Megalodon out of the realm of typical predatory fish and into the weight class of modern baleen whales. Maintaining this colossal mass required a highly specialized metabolic engine. As a lamniform shark, Megalodon possessed a physiological trait known as regional endothermy. While most fish are strictly cold-blooded, meaning their internal body temperature matches the ambient water around them, Megalodon was able to maintain an internal core temperature significantly warmer than the surrounding ocean. This was achieved through a complex specialized network of countercurrent heat-exchanging blood vessels called the rete mirabile. As warm, oxygen-depleted venous blood travelled away from the powerful, constantly working swimming muscles, it passed directly alongside cold, oxygen-rich arterial blood coming from the gills. This anatomical configuration transferred metabolic heat directly back into the core organs, stomach, and brain. Isotopic analysis of carbon and oxygen atoms locked within the enameloid of fossilized Megalodon teeth confirms this internal heating system. The data indicates that Megalodon maintained an internal body temperature that was on average 7 to 12 degrees Celsius warmer than the ambient marine environment. This regional endothermy granted the shark immense physical advantages. It allowed for much faster digestion of dense blubber, accelerated nerve conduction, and provided significantly greater muscular power output for sustained high-speed swimming. Yet, this internal heating system was also a massive metabolic gamble. Regional endothermy is incredibly expensive from an energy perspective. A warm-blooded 40-ton shark requires a continuous, massive influx of high-calorie food just to keep its internal furnace burning. It could not afford to scavenge or rely on small fish. It was biologically bound to target the highest energy resources available in the Miocene biosphere. Every single cubic centimetre of Megalodon's massive frame was optimised by natural selection to operate as a high-speed, high-efficiency, warm-bodied cruise missile, designed to track down, intercept, and consume the migratory whale populations of the ancient world. It was a biological masterpiece of cartilaginous engineering, pushed to the absolute mathematical limit of what a predatory fish could physically achieve on planet Earth. The true horror of Otodus Megalodon was not merely its immense structural volume, but the precise mechanical efficiency with which it deployed that mass through its predatory apparatus. To understand the biomechanics of this ancient shark, we must look past the soft cartilaginous anatomy and focus intently on the physical engineering of its jaws and dentition. Unlike modern mammals, which possess teeth embedded deeply into the bone of the maxilla and mandible via complex root sockets, a shark's teeth are attached to a fibrous connective tissue sheet that sits atop a framework of calcified cartilage. In Megalodon, this arrangement was scaled up to an unprecedented magnitude, creating an engine of destruction specifically designed to systematically dismantle large, bone-bearing prey. The dental morphology of Megalodon represents the absolute pinnacle of cutting and gouging technology in the natural world. If you examine a mature upper anterior tooth of this apex predator, you will find a thick, robust, triangular crown flanked by sharp, finely serrated edges. These serrations are not random irregularities, they are microscopic, uniform cutting elements that act exactly like an industrial meat carving blade. The thickness of the tooth crown is a crucial evolutionary shift away from the thin, blade-like teeth of its Eocene ancestors. While thin teeth are highly effective for slicing through the soft flesh of fast-moving fish, they are highly prone to catastrophic fracturing when they strike dense mineralized bone. Megalodon's teeth evolved a massive convex lingual side and a dense, thickened root structure specifically to absorb the immense kinetic feedback generated by slamming into the ribs and vertebrae of marine mammals. To quantify the exact forces this dental array could unleash, modern biomechanists utilize finite element analysis. By taking high-resolution three-dimensional scans of complete Megalodon tooth rows and mapping them onto a digital reconstruction of the palatoquadrate and Meckel's cartilages, the structural components of the upper and lower shark jaws, scientists can simulate the mechanical stress of a full-force bite. Because the jaws of a shark are not rigidly fused to the cranium, they can protrude forward and downward, a kinetic movement that dramatically increases the functional volume of the mouth during a strike. When these computer models are executed, the mathematical results are staggering. The bite force of a modern great white shark maxims out at approximately 18,000 newtons. By contrast, a conservative modern biomechanical model estimates that a mature 15-meter Otodus Megalodon could exert a crushing force of roughly 108,000 newtons within its anterior jaws. For the absolute largest individuals, reaching the 18-meter threshold, that figure escalates to an astonishing 182,000 newtons of concentrated force. This is over 10 times the mechanical output of the strongest living crocodilians and represents the highest scientifically calculated bite force of any animal in planetary history, comfortably eclipsing even the largest terrestrial carnivorous dinosaurs. However, the raw numerical force is only half of the biological equation. The real lethality lies in how that force was directed. The jaw mechanics of Megalodon were configured to create a mechanical phenomenon known as a stress concentration zone. As the massive jaws closed, the entire force of those tens of thousands of newtons was focused onto the microscopic tips of the triangular teeth. This concentration of pressure easily exceeded the structural yield strength of marine mammal bone. Instead of merely cutting through muscle tissue, Megalodon's bite was a compressive crush that shattered bone structures on impact. This biomechanical capability dictated a highly specific, forensically verified hunting strategy. When paleontologists examine the fossilized skeletons of Miocene baleen whales and cetotheriids, they regularly discover a macabre record of the shark's tactical execution. The bones show highly characteristic deep parallel gouges that match the exact spacing and serration frequency of Megalodon tooth rows. Most significantly, these bite marks are rarely found on the soft abdominal regions of the fossilized whales. Instead, they are heavily concentrated on the flippers, the pectoral girdle, and the dense ribcage surrounding the thorax. This spatial distribution of trauma proves that Megalodon did not employ the ambush and slice strategy used by modern great white sharks when hunting seals. A seal is small enough to be incapacitated by a single blood loss injury. A multi-ton baleen whale, however, possesses immense physical stamina and can easily swim for miles even while bleeding heavily, potentially escaping into shallow or cluttered waters where a giant shark cannot easily maneuver. Therefore, Megalodon utilized a deliberate immobilization strategy. The shark would accelerate from below or from the blind spot of its target, aiming its initial strike directly at the whale's propulsion systems. By crushing the flippers, severing the muscular insertions of the pectoral girdle, or shattering the caudal peduncle near the tail, Megalodon effectively paralyzed its prey within the opening seconds of the encounter. Once the whale was stripped of its steering and locomotion capabilities, it could no longer dive to escape or fight back. With the target immobilized, Megalodon would transition to the second phase of its attack, the thoracic crush. The shark would open its massive jaws, protrude its upper teeth forward, and clamp down directly on the whale's chest cavity. The 182,000 newtons of pressure would instantly splinter the whale's ribs, driving bone fragments deep into its internal organs. The compressive force was so immense that it routinely collapsed the lungs, ruptured the heart, and severed the descending aorta of the prey, causing near-instant death through catastrophic internal hemorrhaging. Fossilized whale vertebrae from the Miocene frequently show compression fractures and complete structural failure, indicating that the force of the shark's bite was strong enough to literally snap the spinal column of a mid-sized cetacean. Once the kill was complete, the mechanical configuration of the teeth allowed for highly efficient feeding. Megalodon would engage in a violent lateral head-shaking motion, utilizing its massive lateral swimming muscles to rock its entire body back and forth. Because its teeth were designed to pierce and hold while the serrations acted as a saw, this head-shaking tore away massive clean blocks of blubber and muscle tissue weighing hundreds of pounds at a time. The shark could swallow these massive segments whole, its highly acidic gastric juices easily dissolving both the dense blubber and the splintered bone fragments. Megalodon was, in every sense of the term, a total system apex predator. It did not hunt around obstacles. It smashed directly through the structural defences of its prey, utilising a combination of unparalleled mass, specialised dental serrations, and an astronomical bite force to systematically break the bodies of the largest animals the ancient oceans had ever produced. For millions of years, the cartilaginous empire of the megatoothed shark seemed completely unbreakable. But in November of 2008, a profound paleontological discovery in the coastal deserts of Peru shattered this narrative forever. A research team led by Dutch researcher Klaas Post was exploring the windswept, hyper-arid sediments of the Pisco Formation at a site known as Cerro Colorado. This barren desert landscape, located roughly 300 kilometers south of Lima, is celebrated globally as one of the most pristine marine fossil graveyards on Earth. During the Miocene epoch, this region was a shallow, highly productive marine bay that acted as a major depositional basin, preserving the skeletal remains of countless ancient marine organisms beneath layers of fine silt and volcanic ash. As the team surveyed the exposed sun-bleached strata, they stumbled upon the highly mineralized, crumbling remains of an absolute titan. Emerging from the desert floor were not the teeth of a giant fish, but the massive, bony fragments of a colossal mammalian cranium. Over several days of meticulous excavation, the true nature of this creature became clear. The team had uncovered a nearly complete skull, measuring an astonishing 3 meters in length, complete with a massive lower jaw and an array of teeth that defied all previously established biological records. This was the holotype specimen of an entirely new genus of hyper-carnivorous sperm whale. In 2010, scientists officially named it Livyatan melvillei, a name combining the terrifying biblical sea monster, Leviathan, with Herman Melville, the legendary author of Moby Dick. To comprehend the sheer physical presence of Livyatan melvillei, we must perform a detailed forensic analysis of its skull, contrasting its mammalian architecture directly with the cartilaginous framework of its rivals. Unlike Megalodon, whose teeth were anchored merely to a shifting conveyor belt of soft fibrous tissue, Livyatan possessed a highly mineralized heavy skull composed of true calcium phosphate bone. The structural integrity of true bone allowed the animal to support massive muscular attachments and withstand immense rotational and compressive stresses that would easily deform or rupture a skull made entirely of flexible cartilage. The jaw apparatus of Livyatan represents one of the most specialized, aggressive predatory structures ever evolved by a vertebrate animal. In modern sperm whales, known scientifically as Physeter mesiocephalus, the upper jaw has completely lost functional dentition. Modern sperm whales possess teeth almost exclusively in their narrow, rod-like lower jaw, using them primarily to create suction to capture soft-bodied deep-sea squid whole. Livyatan, however, was built for a completely different style of engagement. Its upper and lower jaws were wide, exceptionally robust, and paired perfectly with one another to form a massive functional set of bone-crushing shears. The dentition of Livyatan is its most defining anatomical feature. The fossilized teeth recovered from the Pisco Formation are officially classified as the largest functional biting teeth of any known animal in planetary history, completely eclipsing the teeth of all terrestrial carnivorous dinosaurs, including Tyrannosaurus rex. Individual teeth of Livyatan measure up to 36 centimeters in total length from the base of the root to the apex of the crown, with a maximum diameter approaching 12 centimeters. To visualize this, a single tooth from this ancient whale was roughly the size of a human forearm and twice as wide as a mature Megalodon tooth. The functional design of these teeth reveals a profound divergence in hunting methodology. While Megalodon teeth were thin, flattened and serrated to slice through flesh like a saw, the teeth of Livyatan were thick, deeply rooted, and distinctly conical in shape. They lacked serrations entirely. Instead, they were designed based on the mechanical principles of a massive industrial pile driver. The conical shape meant that when the whale closed its jaws, the energy was directed into a piercing point that plunged deep into the tissue of its target, followed by a massive wedge-shaped root that expanded outward to shatter any mineralized structures it encountered. Furthermore, these massive teeth were embedded deeply into profound bony sockets called alveoli, located within both the maxilla of the upper jaw and the dentary bone of the lower jaw. The roots of the teeth made up over 2/3 of their total length, ensuring they were anchored immovably into the structural core of the skull. This deep anatomical anchoring meant that Livyatan could clamp down on a struggling multi-ton prey item and withstand immense lateral, twisting forces without any risk of its teeth breaking free or shearing off at the gum line. The structural scaling of the skull allows scientists to estimate the overall physical dimensions of Livyatan with a high degree of confidence. By using the anatomical proportions of both modern sperm whales and extinct Miocene relatives like Zygophysita, paleontologists have calculated that a mature adult Livyatan melvillei measured between 13 and 15 meters in total length. While slightly shorter on average than the absolute maximum size of an 18-meter Megalodon, its mammalian build was significantly more robust, thick-set, and muscular. A 15-meter Livyatan is estimated to have possessed a total body mass hovering between 40 and 50 metric tons. This puts the whale in the exact same weight class as a mature adult Megalodon. For the first time in millions of years, a creature had emerged from the mammalian line that could match the ultimate predatory fish pound for pound, ton for ton, occupying a matching physical volume within the ancient marine ecosystem. The massive bony palate of Livyatan's skull also reveals deep fossae, large anatomical depressions that once housed the temporal and masseter muscles. These muscle groups, which are responsible for pulling the lower jaw shut, were absolutely immense. Biomechanical reconstructions suggest that the muscular volume of Livyatan's jaw apparatus allowed it to generate a bite force that rivaled and perhaps even structurally stabilized beyond that of the larger sharks. However, Unlike a shark, which must continuously shake its head laterally to saw off pieces of meat because its teeth cannot crush bone effectively, Livyatan's jaw mechanics were optimized for a destructive hold and crush action. Once those massive 36-centimeter conical pegs sank into a target, the mechanical leverage of the bony jaws allowed the whale to hold its prey in an absolute vice-like grip, using its massive body weight to drag the animal down, drown it, or shatter its internal skeletal framework through sheer crushing pressure. The discovery of Livyatan in the Pisco Formation completely dismantled the long-held scientific assumption that Megalodon operated in an ecological vacuum, devoid of any genuine competition. The rock layers of Peru proved that during the late Miocene, the global ocean was not a one-sided monarchy ruled by a single cartilaginous king. Instead, it was a highly volatile, contested arena where two radically different biological superpowers had achieved total physical parity. Livyatan melvillei was a masterpiece of mammalian engineering, a 45-ton warm-blooded juggernaut, armed with a solid bony cranium and a devastating array of forearm-sized teeth. It was an animal designed specifically to challenge the limits of apex predation, bringing a completely new combination of structural strength, structural leverage, and raw crushing power into the deep waters of the prehistoric world, forever changing the evolutionary dynamic of the ancient seas. While the physical jaw apparatus of Livyatan melvillei was an undeniable marvel of osteological engineering, the true evolutionary divergence that allowed this mammalian titan to challenge the reign of the mega-toothed shark lay hidden within the soft tissue structures of its massive cranium and its advanced internal physiology. To truly understand Livyatan, we must look beyond raw mechanical bite force and examine the profound cognitive, sensory, and metabolic advantages that characterize the hyper-carnivorous cetaceans of the late Miocene epoch. This was not merely an animal with massive teeth. It was an intelligent, warm-blooded predator equipped with a sensory suite that operated on a completely different technological level than any fish that had ever lived. The most prominent feature of Livyatan's 3-meter-long skull is a massive, deeply concave basin on its dorsal surface, known scientifically as the supracranial basin. In modern sperm whales, this specialized skeletal depression houses a colossal complex of soft fatty tissue structures consisting of two primary components, the spermaceti organ and the junk. The presence of an identical, exceptionally wide supracranial basin in the fossilized skull of Livyatan confirms that this ancient superpredator possessed a highly developed, heavy acoustic lens system on the top of its head. In terms of sensory capability, this structural complex functioned as the ultimate biological sonar network. Livyatan utilized this apparatus to perform echolocation, a process by which the animal generated high-frequency acoustic clicks within its nasal passages, pushed those sound waves through the spermaceti organ to focus them into a narrow directional beam, and projected that sound out into the surrounding ocean. These sound waves travelled through the water column at roughly 1,500 meters per second, striking physical objects in the environment and bouncing back toward the whale. The returning echoes were collected by fatty channels located within the lower jawbone and transmitted directly to the auditory bullae and the highly complex cetacean brain. The ecological implications of echolocation for a 15-meter apex predator were revolutionary. While Megalodon relied on an advanced network of electroreceptors, lateral lines, and a keen sense of smell, its sensory system was fundamentally passive or limited by water clarity and structural barriers. Livyatan, by contrast, possessed an active three-dimensional mapping system. The whale could literally see through the water column using sound, independent of sunlight or ambient visibility. Even in hyperturbid, sediment-heavy coastal bays, or during the pitch-black hours of the oceanic night, Livyatan could map the exact physical dimensions, swimming speed, and interior skeletal structure of its targets from hundreds of meters away. It could detect the precise position of a pod of small baleen whales long before the prey was aware of its presence, allowing for strategic, pre-planned interception maneuvers that reduce the energy expenditures of hunting. Furthermore, modern research into cetacean biomechanics suggests that the spermaceti organ and the surrounding structural tissues served a dual purpose, functioning as a devastating physical weapon. The junk, the lower portion of the acoustic complex, is divided into distinct localized sections packed with dense connective tissue and highly specialized lipids. This configuration acts exactly like a hydroelastic shock absorber. Because Livyatan possessed a solid, heavily mineralized bony skull behind this soft, fluid-filled frontal cushion, it was anatomically configured to execute high-impact ramming maneuvers. If a rival or a large prey item presented a structural challenge, Livyatan could accelerate over a short distance and drive the massive front-heavy tip of its head directly into the side of its target. The soft, lipid-filled structures would deform slightly on impact, absorbing the kinetic recoil and protecting the delicate brain case and sensory organs of the whale from structural damage. Meanwhile, the absolute momentum of a 45-ton mammalian body travelling at high velocity would transfer entirely into the opponent. This biological battering ram was capable of delivering a blunt force trauma spike that could instantly rupture internal organs, fracture the ribs of rival whales, or completely shatter the soft cartilaginous gill arches and internal skeleton of a giant shark. This capability for high-intensity physical exertion was directly funded by Livyatan's mammalian metabolic engine. As an endothermic, warm-blooded creature, Livyatan maintained a constant, highly regulated internal body temperature independent of the surrounding water column. This systemic heating was powered by a massive high-efficiency heart and a highly developed respiratory system designed to maximize oxygen extraction during surface breathing intervals. While regional endothermy in sharks like Megalodon was a major evolutionary achievement, it was still structurally constrained. Megalodon could only heat specific zones of its body, such as its core swimming muscles and stomach, and its metabolic rate remained partially tied to ambient environmental inputs. Livyatan, however, experienced full, systemic homeothermy. Every single cellular structure throughout its 45-ton frame operated at a continuous, optimized thermal equilibrium. This complete metabolic independence granted Livyatan an unparalleled level of stamina and cognitive processing speed. Warm-blooded brains can process sensory inputs and execute complex motor decisions at a significantly faster rate than cold-blooded or regionally endothermic systems. As a result, Livyatan possessed an advanced level of situational awareness, tactical agility, and behavioral flexibility. It did not rely merely on hardwired instinctual predatory tracks. It could assess changing conditions in real time, adjust its approach based on the defensive behavior of its target, and learn from previous hunting encounters. This cognitive superiority was amplified by the potential for highly structured social behavior. While sharks are fundamentally solitary hunters that view members of their own species primarily as competitors or potential cannibals, modern cetacean biology demonstrates that large-toothed whales are highly social, communicative group dwellers. While we cannot directly fossilize behavior, the massive brain size and advanced neurological architecture indicated by the endocranial casts of Livyatan suggest that this ancient whale likely operated within complex social networks or family pods. Imagine the ecological shift this represented. A single megalodon, hunting in isolation, had to rely entirely on its individual physical dimensions and individual bite force to secure a kill. If a family pod of 2 or 3 mature Livyatan individuals coordinated their actions, the collective predatory power escalated exponentially. They could communicate through localized acoustic whistles and clicks, using coordinated tactical maneuvers to herd schools of baleen whales, cut off escape routes, and protect one another from counterattacks. One individual could execute a distracting ramming maneuver from the front, while another deployed those forearm-sized conical teeth to crush the tail propulsion of the prey from behind. This unique combination of active acoustic vision, physical ramming mechanics, constant internal heating, and advanced mammalian intelligence transformed Livyatan into an entirely new class of oceanic apex predator. It was a creature that fought with both immense physical mass and cognitive strategy. It was a thinking leviathan, operating with a clear sensory and intellectual advantage over every other organism in the Miocene biosphere, completely rewriting the rules of engagement and proving that the path to absolute dominance over the global ocean was paved with neural complexity and physiological sophistication. To truly comprehend how two monumental apex predators could simultaneously occupy the global ocean without immediately driving one another to extinction, we must look through the lens of modern community ecology and resource economics. In the modern world, popular culture frequently depicts Otodus, Megalodon, and Livyatan melvillei locked in constant cinematic gladiator-style combat. However, true natural systems do not operate on the principles of a theatrical arena. In nature, violent conflict is an extremely high-risk, low-reward behaviour. An apex predator that sustains even a minor injury to its jaw, sensory apparatus, or locomotion framework faces a functional death sentence, as any reduction in hunting efficiency leads directly to starvation. Therefore, the coexistence of these two marine titans over millions of years was governed by a fundamental ecological framework known as the competitive exclusion principle, or Gauss's law. This ecological law dictates that two species competing for the exact same limiting resources cannot coexist indefinitely if their ecological niches are identical. The species that possesses even the slightest advantage will eventually outcompete the other, forcing its rival into extinction or driving it to adapt to a different functional role. Because both Megalodon and Livyatan persisted as top-tier hyper-carnivores throughout the late Miocene, it is a mathematical and biological certainty that they successfully achieved niche partitioning. They carved up the vast expanse of the prehistoric oceans, dividing resources, habitats, and hunting strategies to minimize direct costly competition and ensure mutual survival. The first major axis of this ecological division was spatial and depth-related partitioning, dictated entirely by the radical differences in their respiratory anatomy and thermal tolerances. Livyatan was an air-breathing marine mammal. Every single hunting trip it undertook was bound to the absolute physical constraint of its lung capacity. It was obligated to return to the surface of the water column at regular predictable intervals to clear its blowhole and replenish its blood oxygen supplies. Consequently, a massive percentage of its life and predatory behaviour was concentrated in the upper epipelagic zone, specifically within the top few hundred metres of the water column, where its primary prey, small air-breathing baleen whales, also spent their time resting and migrating. Megalodon, by contrast, was a water-breathing fish. Equipped with massive gill arches, it extracted dissolved oxygen directly from the water column, entirely free from any obligation to visit the surface. This anatomical freedom allowed the giant shark to exploit a completely different vertical dimension of the ocean. While Megalodon frequently hunted in shallow coastal waters, its regional endothermy and gill-based respiration allowed it to descend into much deeper, colder and lower oxygen zones of the water column that were highly inefficient or completely inaccessible to an air-breathing whale. If surface resources became scarce, or if competition with a pod of Livyatan became too intense, Megalodon could shift its hunting pressure vertically downward, occupying a deeper spatial niche where it held an absolute monopoly on predatory efficiency. This vertical separation was mirrored by horizontal geographic partitioning on a global scale. While both predators left fossils in highly productive temperate and subtropical regions, their internal physiological engines dictated different geographic boundaries. Livyatan, possessing complete mammalian homeothermy, was structurally capable of maintaining high-efficiency swimming and cognitive processing across a very wide thermal gradient. However, its dependence on small baleen whales anchored it to major upwelling centres and coastal bays where these social cetaceans gathered to breed and feed. Megalodon's regional endothermy, while highly advanced for a shark, was still fundamentally tied to the ambient water temperature for its overall reproductive cycles, the shark required highly specific, warm, shallow coastal bays to act as nursery areas where its juvenile pups could grow safe from adult cannibalism and other predators. This biological anchor meant that Megalodon was intensely bound to specific latitudinal corridors, whereas Livyatan could roam across different geographic areas based on the seasonal migration patterns of its mammalian prey. The second critical axis of niche partitioning lay in their contrasting prey selection and mechanical execution, a concept known in ecology as trophic differentiation. At first glance, both monsters appear to have targeted the exact same resource: the abundant populations of small to medium Miocene whales. However, a forensic analysis of their dental mechanics and functional anatomy proves that they exploited this resource through completely different strategies. Megalodon was a high-speed solitary ambush predator designed for absolute, catastrophic damage. Its hunting strategy relied on surprise, using its serrated teeth and astronomical bite force to shred the propulsion systems of its prey from a blind spot. This made Megalodon exceptionally efficient at targeting highly agile, fast-moving cetaceans and large marine turtles that required instant immobilization. Livyatan, on the other hand, was built for a strategy of physical engagement, endurance, and crushing leverage. Its massive, unserrated conical teeth were designed to hold, puncture, and crush rather than slice. This suggests that Livyatan was highly specialized for hunting slower, more robust or much larger prey items that could be subdued through physical exhaustion and drowning. If Livyatan operated in social units or family pods, its potential prey spectrum expanded to include creatures that a single, solitary Megalodon could not safely tackle without risking a catastrophic counterattack. A pod of intelligent whales could work together to isolate a single large cetacean, using coordinated ramming maneuvers and sustained physical holding to overwhelm a target through sheer systemic endurance. By targeting different species within the wider cetacean community, or by capturing them in entirely different tactical scenarios, the shark and the whale successfully avoided a direct resource war. To conceptualize this relationship accurately, we must view the Miocene Ocean not as a single uniform territory, but as a complex, multi-layered economic marketplace. The small baleen whales were the primary currency of this market, and both predators were highly successful corporations exploiting different demographics of that currency. Megalodon operated like a high-velocity, low-overhead strike team, utilizing low baseline energy expenditures during long cruising intervals, punctuated by explosive, high-intensity ambush strikes that yielded massive caloric rewards. Livyatan operated as a high-investment, high-intelligence enterprise, consuming a massive amount of baseline metabolic energy just to stay warm and think, but offsetting that cost through highly reliable, technologically superior active sonar tracking and coordinated group hunting tactics. When these two corporate entities did happen to cross paths in the same coastal bay, their behavioral ecology was dictated by mutual avoidance and threat display rather than mindless aggression. In modern ecology, when two apex predators encounter one another, such as a lion and a spotted hyena, or a wolf pack and a grizzly bear, they engage in a highly calculated cost-benefit analysis. They communicate their physical dimensions and combat readiness through non-lethal means, such as acoustic vocalizations, body positioning, and chemical signals. Because both Megalodon and Livyatan were fully capable of inflicting fatal injuries on one another, natural selection aggressively weeded out individuals that initiated reckless, unprovoked combat. A large Megalodon detecting the active sonar clicks of an approaching Livyatan pod would simply alter its depth or swimming trajectory to avoid an unnecessary confrontation. A mature Livyatan, identifying the massive silhouette of an 18-meter shark cruising the edge of a reef, would choose to keep its distance or signal its pod members to tighten their formation, presenting a united, impenetrable wall of bone and muscle that the solitary shark knew better than to challenge. This silent strategic truce was the true secret behind the ecological stability of the Miocene marine world. For millions of years, the ocean was large enough, wealthy enough, and structurally complex enough to accommodate both forms of apex predation. The Cartilaginous king and the Mammalian titan ruled their respective sectors of the ecosystem like two rival empires separated by an unwritten border. They shared the same waters, drank from the same fountain of hyper-abundant cetacean biomass, and pushed the physical boundaries of vertebrate evolution to their absolute structural limits. It was a golden age of balance, an intricate dance of spatial tracking, depth selection, and tactical differentiation that allowed the ultimate shark and the ultimate whale to divide the dominion of the global ocean without ever having to engage in a final, apocalyptic war for survival. To reconstruct the silent ancient interactions between Otodus Megalodon and Livyatan melvillei, modern paleontology must look beyond speculative models and operate as a forensic science. We cannot watch these titans hunt, but they left an indelible, atomic signature of their behaviour locked within the rock record. By treating the fossilised floors of ancient oceans like a prehistoric crime scene, researchers utilise cutting-edge geochemical techniques and bone surface taphonomy to extract direct empirical evidence of what these animals ate, where they fed, and how they interacted within the Miocene food web. The primary breakthroughs in this forensic investigation come from two distinct scientific disciplines: stable isotope geochemistry and macroscopic bone damage analysis. The most revolutionary tool in modern trophic paleontology is the analysis of stable isotopes preserved within the highly mineralized enameloid of fossil teeth. For decades, scientists relied on nitrogen stable isotope analysis to determine an animal's position on the food chain, known as its trophic level. However, nitrogen is bound to organic proteins like collagen, which degrade rapidly over millions of years, making it highly unreliable for deeply ancient fossils like those of the Miocene. To circumvent this limitation, modern geochemists pioneered the use of non-traditional stable isotopes, specifically zinc and calcium, which are locked directly into the inorganic mineral matrix of tooth enameloid and remain pristine for tens of millions of years. The scientific principle behind zinc isotope analysis is a chemical phenomenon known as biopurification and trophic fractionation. Zinc has several stable isotopes, with zinc-66 and zinc-64 being the most ecologically relevant. When an animal consumes food, its metabolic processes preferentially absorb the lighter, zinc-64 isotope into its muscular and organ tissues, while excreted waste contains a higher concentration of the heavier zinc-66. Consequently, as you move higher up the dietary pyramid from primary producers to apex predators, the ratio of zinc-66 to zinc-64 in the animal's body steadily drops. By using cleanroom chemical separation and multi-collector inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, scientists can measure these minute atomic ratios in pulverized samples of fossil teeth. When researchers executed this geochemical analysis on teeth collected from various global Miocene deposits, the data revealed an incredibly precise map of the ecosystem. The zinc isotope values of Otodus Megalodon and Livyatan melvillei were remarkably low, plotting significantly lower than any other marine organisms in their respective formations. This geochemical signature provides definitive, empirical proof that both creatures operated at the absolute peak of the marine food web. They were not generalist scavengers or consumers of small fish. Their atomic signatures confirm an exclusive high-trophic diet consisting almost entirely of secondary consumers, specifically the blubber-rich marine mammal populations of the ancient seas. To refine this picture further, scientists combine zinc data with calcium isotope tracking. Calcium-44 and calcium-42 ratios vary depending on the specific type of tissue an animal digests. Predators that primarily consume soft, fleshy muscle meat and blubber exhibit a different calcium isotope fractionation pattern than those that crush and ingest large quantities of mineralized bone. the calcium data from Megalodon enameloid aligns perfectly with a flesh-shearing diet, indicating that the shark used its serrated teeth to saw away massive segments of muscle and fat, while deliberately avoiding the ingestion of dense skeletal elements when possible. Conversely, the calcium profiles obtained from Livyatan teeth reveal a much higher incidence of bone marrow and structural mineral assimilation. This matches the mechanical predictions of its heavy, conical dentition. Livyatan was not a delicate slicer, it was a bone crusher. When it clamped down on a prey item, its forearm-sized teeth smashed through the rib cages and spinal columns of small whales, pulverizing the bone and causing the whale to routinely swallow bone fragments along with the meat, leaving a distinct calcium signature locked within its tooth structure for 12 million years. While geochemistry provides the broad systemic map of what passed through the digestive tracts of these super predators, macroscopic bone damage analysis, or taphonomy, provides the physical, moment-by-moment narrative of individual hunts. Throughout the marine fossil beds of Peru, North America, and Europe, paleontologists have unburied thousands of fossilized bones belonging to Miocene cetaceans, seals, and sirenians. A massive percentage of these bones bear unmistakable marks of violent predatory trauma, acting as a permanent petrified ledger of ancient violence. Reading these bone scars requires a deep understanding of structural forensics. When a shark like Megalodon strikes a bone, its teeth leave highly characteristic marks known as thin, linear parallel gouges or unbranched scrape lines. Because Megalodon possessed thousands of finely serrated, blade-like cutting edges that moved in a predictable lateral headshake, its teeth acted like a mechanical saw. Under microscopic magnification, these gouges display tiny, uniform striations within the cut channel that precisely replicate the spacing of the serrations on a Megalodon tooth crown. Furthermore, these marks are often accompanied by deep compressional fractures, where the absolute force of the shark's bite exceeded the structural threshold of the whale's ribs, causing the bone to splinter outward. In some extraordinary specimens, the tip of a Megalodon tooth has fractured off completely during a strike, and remains embedded directly inside the healed or unhealed bone tissue of the prey, providing an undeniable ironclad link between the perpetrator and the victim. Livyatan and its close hyper-carnivorous relatives left a completely different forensic footprint on the fossil record. Because their teeth were smooth, thick and conical, they did not leave clean, linear serrated scrape marks. Instead, their attacks are recorded in the form of massive deep circular puncture wounds, extensive oval indentations and catastrophic crushing fractures. When a target was gripped by the bony jaws of Livyatan, the sheer compressive energy did not slice the periosteum of the bone, it imploded it. Fossilized ribs of Miocene baleen whales frequently show massive localized impact depressions that match the exact diameter of a mature Livyatan tooth crown. These impact zones are surrounded by concentric radiating fracture lines, indicating a sudden, immense application of blunt force that instantly shattered the cortical bone layer. In many cases, the ribs show complete transverse fractures, meaning the bone was snapped clean in half, proving that the animal was subjected to a crushing vice grip that could compress a whale's entire thoracic cavity until the skeletal architecture simply collapsed. By mapping the distribution of these two distinct types of bone damage across thousands of specimens, paleontologists can track how hunting pressure shifted across different seasons, geographies, and prey demographics. The forensic data shows that Megalodon marks are heavily concentrated on highly agile mid-sized cetaceans, with a major emphasis on targeting the tail and flipper regions to achieve instant immobilization. Livyatan marks, while less numerically abundant due to the rarity of mammalian fossilization compared to shark teeth, are frequently discovered on larger, more robust prey items, and show a random, highly aggressive distribution across the entire skeleton, indicating a hunting style centered on prolonged physical wrestling and total structural suppression. This forensic archive completely removes the study of ancient marine ecosystems from the realm of creative imagination. Through the precise collection of stable isotope ratios, scientists have mapped the exact energetic architecture of the Miocene seas, proving that both the shark and the whale occupied matching hyper-carnivorous heights on the food chain. Through the careful inspection of microfractures and gouge patterns on fossilized skeletons, they have reconstructed the final, terrifying moments of prehistoric encounters. The rocks do not lie. They preserve a highly detailed, chemically verified record of an ocean ruled by two completely different mechanical philosophies of destruction, leaving modern science with a clear forensic testament to the absolute reality of their shared ecological reign. The architectural balance of the Miocene Ocean, which had funded the existence of both Otodus Megalodon and Livyatan melvillei for millions of years, was not destroyed by a sudden cosmic impact or a biological disease. Instead, it was systematically dismantled by the slow, irresistible movement of tectonic plates and the resulting transformation of the global climate system. As the Miocene epoch gave way to the Pliocene epoch roughly 5 million years ago, the physical engine of the planet shifted gears, triggering a global cooling event that altered the oceanic highways, disrupted thermal energy transport, and forever changed the rules of survival for marine life. The primary geological catalyst for this planetary transformation occurred at the junction between North and South America. For over 15 million years, the Central American Seaway had remained open, acting as a massive marine gateway that allowed a powerful, warm, equatorial current to flow unimpeded between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This circumtropical conveyor belt maintained a highly homogeneous global climate, keeping sea surface temperatures elevated and preventing the stark environmental isolation of the polar regions. However, the relentless subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the Caribbean Plate initiated a massive tectonic uplift. Over millions of years, an underwater chain of volcanic islands emerged, steadily narrowing the deep marine channel. By the early Pliocene, this volcanic chain had consolidated into a continuous land bridge known as the Isthmus of Panama. The completion of this narrow strip of land represented a catastrophic disruption to the global oceanographic matrix. By physically blocking the equatorial current, the Isthmus of Panama forced the planetary conveyor belt to completely reroute its movement. Warm Atlantic waters, no longer able to escape into the Pacific, were deflected northward along the eastern coast of North America, accelerating the development of a powerful western boundary current known as the Gulf Stream. Initially, this redirection of thermal energy brought immense heat to the North Atlantic, but it carried a hidden, long-term climatic cost. As the warm, highly saline waters of the Gulf Stream travelled into northern latitudes, they encountered cold polar air masses. This interaction triggered a massive increase in evaporation, pumping immense quantities of water vapour into the northern atmosphere. When this moisture-laden air circulated over northern land masses, it fell as concentrated snow. Over tens of thousands of years, this unremitting snowfall accumulated, forming massive, permanent continental glaciers across North America, Greenland, and northern Europe. The growth of these northern ice sheets initiated a powerful, self-reinforcing climate feedback loop. Glacial ice possesses a very high albedo, meaning it reflects a massive percentage of solar radiation back into space rather than absorbing it as heat. As the ice sheets expanded, they caused the planet to cool at an accelerated rate, pushing the global climate system into an era of intense cyclical glaciation. The global thermostat dropped rapidly, ending the prolonged greenhouse conditions of the Middle Miocene and plunging the Earth into a much cooler, more volatile state. This atmospheric cooling had an immediate and devastating impact on the temperature profiles of the global ocean, a process known as Oceanic thermal stratification. During the peak of the Miocene, the vertical temperature gradient of the sea was relatively gentle. Warm water extended deep into the water column, and the temperature difference between equatorial and polar waters was far less pronounced than it is today. As the Pliocene glacial cycles intensified, the polar oceans dropped toward freezing temperatures. This cold, highly dense water sank rapidly to the ocean floor, flowing along the deep-sea abyssal plains back toward the equator. This movement created a stark, permanent boundary between the sunlit, warm surface layers of the ocean and the pitch-black, near-freezing deep waters below, a phenomenon known as the thermocline. At the same time, the horizontal temperature gradient across latitudes became incredibly severe. The tropical zones remained warm, but the temperate and polar zones were subjected to intense thermal drops. Vast stretches of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which had once maintained comfortable warm temperatures year-round, were transformed into cold, seasonally volatile environments. For a regionally endothermic shark like Megalodon, this thermal fragmentation of the ocean was a direct assault on its physiological limits. While its countercurrent heat exchangers allowed it to maintain a warm core while hunting in temperate waters, it was still fundamentally a creature of tropical ancestry. It could not survive or maintain its immense 48-ton metabolic engine in waters that regularly dropped towards single digits in degrees Celsius. As the cold polar waters expanded southward, the habitable geographic zone for Megalodon contracted significantly, squeezing the global population into a narrowing band of warm equatorial waters. Furthermore, this global cooling altered the physical structure of coastal environments. As the expanding continental ice sheets locked up trillions of tons of the planet's water supply on land, global sea levels dropped by dozens of meters. This drop drained the vast, shallow, sun-drenched epicontinental seas that had flooded the margins of continental plates during the Miocene. These shallow coastal ecosystems, which had functioned as highly productive marine nurseries and primary hunting grounds for the giant shark, completely vanished, replaced by steep, rocky continental shelves exposed to violent open ocean waves and volatile temperature fluctuations. Livyatan melvillei, despite possessing complete mammalian homeothermy that granted it superior individual resistance to cold water, was equally vulnerable to this structural restructuring of the planet. While an individual whale could maintain its internal body temperature through thick layers of insulating blubber even in cold seas, its entire operational strategy was bound to the geographic distribution of its prey. The planetary cooling event did not merely change water temperatures, it initiated a profound reorganization of primary productivity. The closing of the Central American Seaway and the intensification of the thermocline disrupted the ancient upwelling systems that had fertilized the coastal bays of the Miocene. The reliable, continuous phytoplankton blooms that had fed trillions of schooling fish and millions of small baleen whales began to flicker and fail. Production became highly seasonal, concentrated in brief, explosive bursts during specific months of the year, followed by long periods of biological dormancy. This shift from a stable, high-calorie global ocean to a highly fragmented, cold and seasonal marine system struck at the very foundation of the mega-predator lifestyle. The planet had altered the economic terms of the marine environment. The continuous surplus of energy that had funded the coexistence of a 40-ton predatory shark and a 40-ton predatory whale was being drawn down by the closing of a single marine gateway thousands of miles away. The stage was being cleared of its warm, shallow arenas, and both titans were about to be forced into an unforgiving environmental bottleneck where raw power and massive size were no longer evolutionary assets, but crushing structural liabilities. The fundamental law of trophic ecology states that an apex predator can only exist as long as the underlying layers of the food pyramid remain stable and structurally sound. When the global climate shifts of the early Pliocene began to drop the planetary thermostat, it did not target Otodus Megalodon or Livyatan melvillei directly through sudden physical mortality. Instead, it struck at their food supply, initiating a catastrophic collapse of the marine biomass that left both superpredators facing an insurmountable metabolic crisis. The highly specialized, high-calorie food web that had supported 40-ton hyper-carnivores for millions of years completely dissolved, forcing a radical reorganization of marine mammal distribution across the globe. The primary casualties of this planetary cooling were the small diverse Cetothere baleen whales that had formed the absolute baseline of the megapredator diet throughout the Miocene epoch. These small baleen whales, measuring between 3 and 9 meters in length, were adapted to warm, stable, shallow coastal waters and reliable upwelling cells. As the epicontinental seas drained due to dropping sea levels, and the open ocean highways were shut down by the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, these specialized coastal habitats vanished. Lacking the heavy blubber layers and the physiological specialization required to survive in cold, highly volatile environments, dozens of lineages of small baleen whales suffered a massive, widespread extinction event. In their evolutionary place emerged a new class of cetaceans, the modern giant mystichetes, ancestors of the blue whale, the fin whale, the humpback whale, and the bowhead whale began to scale up rapidly in body mass, initiating a profound macroevolutionary trend toward extreme gigantism. This increase in size was a direct response to the new seasonal reality of the planet. In a cooling ocean, primary productivity was no longer continuous or globally distributed. It became highly concentrated at the geographic poles, where massive seasonal upwelling cells produced intense brief bursts of krill and zooplankton during the polar summer. To exploit these massive but distant food resources, whales needed to evolve bodies large enough to store immense amounts of energy and travel thousands of miles across barren open ocean basins. A 20-meter whale possessed a massive volume-to-surface area ratio, allowing it to retain body heat in freezing waters and carry thousands of gallons of insulating blubber. However, this evolutionary migration toward the polar circles created an absolute geographical barrier between the prey and the ultimate megatoothed shark. Despite its regional endothermy, Otodus megalodon was structurally restricted by its cold-blooded ancestry. Its countercurrent heat exchangers could keep its core swimming muscles warm, but its gills were exposed directly to the ambient water, continuously dumping metabolic heat back into the surrounding sea. The shark could not maintain its core body temperature or execute high-speed hunting maneuvers in near-freezing polar waters. As the modern giant whales migrated into the Arctic and Antarctic circles to feed on the massive summer plankton blooms, Megalodon was left stranded in the warming but biologically depleted equatorial zones. Its primary food source had literally moved out of bounds, leaving the giant shark confined to a tropical desert, where the remaining fish and small marine mammals were far too small to satisfy its metabolic demands. This geographical dislocation exposed the absolute fatal flaw of the hyper-predatory lifestyle: extreme metabolic overhead. A mature 48-ton megalodon required an estimated hundreds of thousands of calories every single day just to fund its basal metabolic rate and maintain regional endothermy. When food was abundant, its size was an asset that allowed it to overpower any creature in the sea. But in a resource-depleted Pliocene ocean, its size became a crushing biological debt. The shark was trapped in a negative energy feedback loop, expending more calories cruising the barren tropical waters in search of food than it could realistically recover from the small, agile prey items that remained. Livyatan melvillei faced an equally catastrophic bottleneck, though its physiological limits manifested in a completely different manner. As a true warm-blooded mammal, Livyatan possessed the internal heating capacity to travel into colder waters alongside the migrating whale populations. However, its anatomical specialization was deeply bound to hyper-carnivory. Its massive forearm-sized conical teeth and heavily mineralized skull were designed specifically to crush and grip mid-sized, blubber-rich prey. As the small baleen whales went extinct and the surviving mystichetes evolved into multi-ton giants, the dynamic of the hunt changed completely. A single 15-meter Livyatan, even when operating within a social pod, faced extreme physical risks when attempting to subdue a modern giant baleen whale. A blue or fin whale was not merely a larger meal, it was an organism possessing immense kinetic power, capable of unleashing devastating defensive strikes with its massive caudal flukes. An unsuccessful attack on a giant mystichete could result in catastrophic bone fractures or internal trauma to the predator. Furthermore, the sheer speed and open ocean endurance of these new streamlined giant whales allowed them to easily outpace the heavy, robustly built raptorial sperm whales in long-distance oceanic pursuits. Compounding this prey crisis was a profound reproductive vulnerability inherent to long-lived massive mammals. Large cetaceans possess exceptionally long gestation periods, often lasting over a year, and invest massive amounts of metabolic energy into raising a single offspring to maturity. In an ecosystem defined by seasonal food scarcity and unpredictable nutrient drops, the reproductive rate of Livyatan likely crashed. If a mature female could not secure a continuous, massive surplus of high-fat blubber, her body would shut down ovulation or fail to produce the rich milk necessary to sustain a nursing calf. As mortality rates among juveniles escalated due to starvation, the total global population of hyper-carnivorous sperm whales experienced a rapid, irreversible decline. Thus, the collapse of the Miocene food web systematically starved the two most formidable predators the oceans had ever produced. They were both victims of their own evolutionary overspecialization. Megalodon was a biological masterpiece designed to rule warm coastal seas, but it was physically barred from entering the new polar feeding grounds of its prey. Livyatan was a cognitive juggernaut designed to crush mid-sized cetaceans, but it was crushed by the energy requirements of its own massive mammalian brain and internal furnace when those specific targets vanished from the biosphere. The changing planet had rewritten the economic equation of survival, turning the immense size and unmatched weaponry of the shark and the whale into an evolutionary dead end, proving that in the theatre of deep time, the capacity to adapt to a changing food supply will always outmatch raw physical dominance. The extinction of Otodus Megalodon and Livyatan melvillei was not a simple vacancy of the apex predator niche. It was a profound, hostile takeover executed by an entirely new generation of smaller, more versatile and highly efficient marine hunters. For millions of years, the absolute size and raw physical force of the two Miocene titans had rendered them invincible. However, when the Pliocene epoch restructured the global ocean into a cold, seasonal and resource-scarce environment, massive body scaling transformed from an evolutionary advantage into a fatal thermodynamic burden. As the old empires starved under the weight of their own massive metabolic overhead, natural selection shifted its favour toward an entirely different anatomical and behavioural design. The future of oceanic dominance belonged to a class of highly adaptable predators that prioritised agility over mass, group coordination over individual size, and wide dietary flexibility over hyperspecialisation. The primary benefactor of this evolutionary shift within the cartilaginous fish lineage was the genus Carcharodon, culminating in the rise of the modern great white shark, Carcharodon carcharius. As established by modern dental morphology and cladistic analysis, the great white shark was not a direct descendant or a miniature version of Megalodon. It belonged to the family Lamnidae, a separate branch of lamniform sharks that had evolved alongside the megatoothed giants for millions of years. During the late Miocene, while Megalodon was maxing out its physical dimensions to hunt multi-ton whales, the ancestors of the great white shark remained relatively small, averaging between 3 and 5 meters in length, and specialized in hunting smaller, fast-moving marine mammals, seals, and large fish. This smaller size class, which had kept the great white shark in the shadow of Megalodon for eons, became its ultimate salvation when the Pliocene food web collapsed. A 5-meter great white shark possessed a total body mass of roughly 1 to 2 metric tons, a tiny fraction of the massive 48 to 100 metric tons of a mature Megalodon. From a thermodynamic perspective, this mass differential changed everything. The baseline daily caloric requirement of a great white shark was exponentially lower than that of its megatoothed cousin. While a single megalodon needed to consume multiple small whales every single week, just to avoid a negative energy balance, a great white shark could survive for extended periods on a highly diverse low-calorie diet of small bony fish, rays, and seabirds, while occasionally scavenging on dead whale carcasses. Furthermore, the great white shark possessed a highly streamlined, exceptionally agile body, plan-optimized for high-speed acceleration and complex maneuvering. Its teeth had evolved from thick, heavy, bone-crushing pegs into flattened, razor-sharp, triangular blades with highly advanced serrations designed explicitly to slice through soft flesh and blubber with minimal resistance. This dental mechanics package allowed the great white shark to utilize an exceptionally efficient bite-and-spit hunting strategy when targeting marine mammals like seals and sea lions. Instead of engaging in a high-energy, prolonged physical wrestling match with its prey, which carried a high risk of structural injury, the great white shark would strike from a blind spot, inflict a single, massive, exsanguinating wound, and then retreat to a safe distance, waiting for the target to lose consciousness from blood loss before feeding. This strategy minimized energy expenditure and entirely eliminated the need for massive bone-crushing jaws or an immense skeletal framework. Simultaneously, an even more profound evolutionary revolution was occurring within the cetacean lineage, leading to the truest usurpers of the modern ocean, the delphinids, specifically the ancestors of the modern killer whale, Orcanus orca. While Livyatan had represented the absolute zenith of the raptorial sperm whale lineage, its reproductive limits, solitary or small pod architecture, and reliance on mid-sized baleen whales made it fragile under environmental stress. As the Pliocene progressed, a highly advanced line of oceanic dolphins began to scale up in size, occupying the functional role of macro-predatory cetaceans through a completely different evolutionary philosophy. The primitive ancestors of the killer whale, such as Orcinus cetoniensis, did not attempt to match the 15-metre length or 45-ton mass of Livyatan. Instead, they stabilised at a highly efficient size of roughly 6 to 8 metres in length, with a total body mass averaging between 3 and 6 metric tons. This size class offered the perfect equilibrium between mechanical power and metabolic economy. It was large enough to generate immense hydrodynamic speed and tackle other marine mammals, yet small enough to maintain a highly active, warm-blooded metabolism without facing immediate starvation when large prey populations fluctuated. The true secret weapon of the emerging killer whale lineage was not its dentition, but its unparalleled neural complexity and the development of highly structured generational matriarchal societies. While Livyatan possessed a massive brain, its social configuration was still constrained by the reproductive economics of large sperm whales. The smaller delphinids, however, developed a level of social coordination and cooperative hunting intelligence that had never before existed on planet Earth. They did not hunt as isolated individuals or loose aggregations. They operated as highly integrated, permanent social units that functioned effectively as a single, multi-headed superorganism. This social intelligence allowed early killer whales to completely transcend the limitations of individual body mass. A single 6-ton killer whale could never hope to confront a modern 20-metre giant baleen whale or a massive shark in a direct, head-on physical engagement. But a coordinated pack of 10 to 15 highly intelligent, communicating individuals could systematically dismantle any creature in the ocean. They utilised advanced real-time tactical communication to execute complex multi-stage hunting manoeuvres. When hunting giant baleen whales, the pod would work in perfect synchronization. Some individuals would leap onto the blowhole of the giant whale to force it underwater and drown it, while others bit at the pectoral flippers and caudal flukes to strip away its steering and propulsion, while the matriarchs guided the strategy based on decades of learned experience. This pack hunting methodology granted the killer whale lineage an exceptionally broad and flexible diet. They were the ultimate ecological generalists. If the migration patterns of giant baleen whales shifted, A pod of killer whales could seamlessly transition to hunting schools of herring, tracking pods of smaller porpoises, raiding colonies of seals along rocky shorelines, or systematically hunting down large sharks. They could adapt their vocalizations, their hunting formations, and their targeted prey choices from one week to the next, insulated from the extinction pressures that destroy hyper-specialized predators like Livyatan. Furthermore, the sensory capabilities of these advanced delphinids operated on a much higher speed and resolution matrix than the ancient systems of the Miocene. Their echolocation networks were highly refined, utilizing a much wider frequency range that allowed them to track tiny targets in complex, shallow coastal environments with absolute precision, while simultaneously filtering out environmental noise. Their social structure also allowed for the cultural transmission of hunting techniques across generations. A young killer whale did not have to rely entirely on hardwired genetic instincts. It spent years learning specific, highly localized hunting strategies from its mother and grandmothers, such as intentional beaching to capture seals, or creating acoustic wave strikes to wash prey off ice floes. When these two new classes of apex predators assumed total control of the Pliocene and early Pleistocene oceans, they completely locked out any possibility of a resurgence from the giant lineages of the past. If a juvenile megalodon, or a small, struggling population of raptorial sperm whales attempted to exploit a coastal bay, they were instantly outcompeted and actively suppressed by these smaller, faster and more intelligent rivals. A pod of killer whales could easily locate, isolate and systematically kill a subadult megalodon or a solitary ancient whale, viewing them not merely as competitors, but as high-calorie sources of food. The transition of ocean dominance from Megalodon and Livyatan to the great white shark and the killer whale is a profound demonstration of the fundamental principles of evolutionary economics. The ancient titans were defeated not because they lacked power, but because their design was too expensive for a changing planet. They were the high-maintenance luxury machines of a wealthy, warm Miocene world. When the global climate turned cold, volatile and impoverished, natural selection stripped away the crown of absolute size and handed it to the lean, agile and socially complex generalists. The great white shark, with its low overhead metabolism and razor-sharp cutting precision, and the killer whale, with its peerless cognitive processing and devastating pack-hunting strategy, became the true rulers of the modern seas, proving that in the endless, unforgiving ledger of deep time, intelligence, adaptability, and metabolic efficiency will always tarnish and conquer raw physical scale. The epic narrative of Otodus Megalodon and Livyatan melvillei is far more than a spectacular chapter in prehistoric zoology. It is a profound case study in the immutable laws of evolutionary economics and planetary change. For millions of years, these two titans stood as the absolute zenith of their respective biological lineages. They occupied the matching physical volumes of their shared ecosystem, deploying entirely different mechanical strategies of destruction to claim the wealth of a warm, hyper-abundant world. Yet despite their unmatched jaw forces, their forearm-sized teeth, their regional endothermy, and their echolocation, both lines ultimately broke when the structural architecture of the global ocean transformed. Their disappearance from the fossil record leaves behind a vital scientific lesson. In the theatre of deep time, absolute physical dominance is an illusion, and survival is granted not to the largest or the most heavily armed, but to those who can maintain their metabolic equilibrium through a changing environment. When we look at the modern marine biosphere, we are looking directly at a landscape shaped by the ghosts of these ancient giants. The extreme gigantism of our modern baleen whales, such as the blue whale, which now reigns as the largest animal to ever exist on Earth, is a living monument to the extinction of the mega-predators. For as long as Megalodon and Livyatan patrolled the warm latitudinal bands of the Miocene epoch, baleen whales were biologically constrained by intense hunting pressure. Any whale lineage that grew too massive or too slow became a highly conspicuous target for an 18-metre shark or a 15-metre pod-hunting cetacean. The The planetary cooling event of the early Pliocene simultaneously starved the predators and unlocked the evolutionary potential of the filter feeders. By driving Megalodon out of the polar zones and wiping the hyper-carnivorous sperm whales from the middle latitudes, the climate created a vast geographical sanctuary at the poles. In those cold, nutrient-rich waters, the ancestors of our modern gentle giants could scale up their body mass to astronomical sizes, entirely free from the threat of a 40-ton predator crushing their rib cages or severing their flippers. The modern ocean is a quieter, more peaceful realm precisely because the colossal engines of active hypercarnivory proved too expensive to maintain. Furthermore, the modern descendants of the sperm whale family took a radical evolutionary detour to escape the extinction bottleneck that consumed Livyatan. While the raptorial branch of the family completely vanished, the deep-diving branch thrived. The modern sperm whale completely abandoned its reliance on marine mammals, relinquishing its upper functional teeth and heavy bone-crushing jaw mechanics. Instead, it retreated into the pitch-black high-pressure depth of the bathypelagic zone, utilizing its massive acoustic spermaceti organ not to locate coastal baleen whales, but to track down giant squid in the abyssal plains. This ecological retreat allowed the lineage to persist into the modern era, showing that sometimes the path to survival requires a species to entirely step down from the competitive arena of apex predation. The story of the shark and the whale forces us to confront the deep fragility of hyperspecialization. Both Megalodon and Livyatan maxed out their physical boundaries to exploit a highly specific environmental luxury, an endless year-round supply of small, slow-moving coastal whales. They were masterfully designed for that exact economic market. But when the Isthmus of Panama rose, when the oceanic currents rerouted, and when the planetary thermal structure stratified into severe seasonal extremes, their high overhead biological profiles became a trap. Their specialized architecture could not adapt to a world that demanded generalist flexibility, dietary diversity, and low-energy endurance. They were outmaneuvered, outcompeted, and actively suppressed by the smaller, faster, and more socially advanced lineages of the great white shark and the killer whale. Hunters that conquered the ocean through metabolic thrift and cognitive synchronization. This long-term perspective changes our understanding of nature's true power. True strength is not recorded in the magnitude of a single bite force or the raw length of a fossilized tooth crown. It is measured in the continuity of a lineage across geological epochs. The Cartilaginous king and the mammalian titan have returned to the stone from which they came, leaving modern science to piece together the forensic fragments of their ancient war. They remind us that the Earth is a dynamic, ever-shifting theatre, and no empire, no matter how physically imposing, holds a permanent lease on the absolute peak of the food web. We have travelled across millions of years, exploring the ancient greenhouse climates of the Miocene, decoding the biomechanical physics of bone-crushing dentition, and tracing the forensic scars left behind on petrified bone beds. Now, as we return to the surface of our modern world, we want to hear your perspective on this ultimate prehistoric showdown. If these two titans had existed in a localized coastal bay with dwindling resources, do you think the solitary, high-velocity ambush precision of Megalodon would have triumphed? Or would the coordinated, warm-blooded cognitive strategy of a Livyatan family pod have secured the ocean? Please share your thoughts, your theories, and your evolutionary insights in the comment section below. And while you're down there, do not forget to tell us exactly where in the world and what time of day or night it is as you watch this deep dive into paleontology. If you found this rigorous scientific journey into our planet's past engaging, please take a brief moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue digging into the fossil archives and bringing the grand forgotten conflicts of deep time back to life. Thank you for exploring the ancient seas with us today, and until the next discovery, keep looking closely at the world around you.